When Emma Hartwell's desperate attempt to salvage her grandfather's antique tractor sent the rusty machine crashing through the rotting floorboards of her century-old barn, she never expected to uncover a massive underground military installation beneath her failing family farm. She certainly couldn't have imagined that specialized government agents would descend on her rural property before sunrise, or that her accidental discovery would contain sophisticated communication technology. The Pentagon had officially declared dismantled and obsolete more than 50 years ago. What followed would not only rescue her family's homestead from imminent foreclosure, but bring to light forgotten technological innovations that would revolutionize wireless connectivity across America's most isolated rural communities, transforming the digital divide that had kept countryside residents disconnected for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The June heat pressed down on Oak Ridge County like a weighted blanket, shimmering above the parched cornfields that struggled to survive the third consecutive summer of punishing drought. Emma Hartwell stood in the shadow of her weathered barn, wiping sweat from her forehead with a bandana that had once been bright red, but had faded to a dusty rose from years of sun exposure and washing. At 36, the fine lines around her eyes deepened as she squinted at the ancient John Deere Model 60 tractor parked just inside the wide barn doors. Her grandfather's pride and joy, now little more than a 5,000-pound monument to better days. "Just one more try," she muttered, tucking a stray strand of chestnut hair back into her practical ponytail. "That's all I'm asking." The Hartwell farm had been in Emma's family for 4 generations, passed down through the years with a stubborn determination that seemed to run in their blood. The 180 acres of once fertile land had supported them comfortably for decades, but the combination of industrial farming competition, climate change, and predatory lending practices had nearly brought them to their knees. The farm that had sustained her great-grandparents through the Great Depression and her grandparents through various agricultural downturns now teetered on the brink of foreclosure under Emma's reluctant stewardship. She hadn't planned on becoming a farmer. With a degree in agricultural engineering from State University, Emma had been working for an environmental consultancy firm in Chicago when her father's sudden death 3 years earlier had called her home. What was meant to be a temporary return to handle affairs had stretched into years as she discovered the true extent of the farm's financial troubles. Selling had seemed the obvious choice until she found her grandfather's journals. Jackson Hartwell, her father's father, had died when Emma was just 12, leaving behind a reputation as an eccentric but brilliant man. A veteran who rarely spoke of his military service, he had returned from his mysterious government work in the 1960s to take over the family farm with an almost religious devotion to the land. His journals, discovered in a locked chest in the attic, contained farming wisdom intermingled with cryptic references and strange diagrams that Emma had initially dismissed as the ramblings of an aging mind. One passage, however, had struck her with particular force. "The land holds secrets worth more than gold. The Model 60 is the key. Keep it running. Keep it here. Promise me, son." Her father had kept that promise, maintaining the ancient tractor long after it had outlived its practical use. Now, with the bank threatening foreclosure within the month, Emma found herself gambling the last of her savings on restoring the decrepit machine, not because it made financial sense, but because she had run out of rational options. The restoration process had emptied her already strained bank account. Parts for a 70-year-old tractor weren't exactly stocked at the local farm supply store, and the specialized machining for certain components had cost far more than she'd anticipated. Her neighbor, Frank Wilson, whose family had farmed the adjacent property for nearly as long as the Hartwells, had made his opinion abundantly clear. "You're throwing good money after bad, Em," he'd said just yesterday, leaning against the fence line that separated their properties. His own fields now displayed the sterile uniformity of corporate agriculture, having sold to mid-American agricultural enterprises the previous year. "That ancient contraption isn't worth a tank of diesel. Your grandfather was a good man, but he had some strange notions. Sometimes the past needs to stay in the past." The local John Deere dealer had been even less charitable when she'd asked about sourcing original parts. "Ms. Hartwell, that Model 60 belongs in a museum, not a working farm. With all due respect to your family's sentimentality, I strongly suggest you allocate your limited resources toward more practical investments. Or consider mid-American standing. Offer before the bank makes the decision for you." Emma had heard the same advice from the loan officer at Oak Ridge County Bank, from the agricultural extension agent, and from what remained of the farming community at the monthly co-op meetings. The smart money was on selling out to Mid-American, which had systematically acquired 11 local farms over the past 18 months, transforming the patchwork landscape of family homesteads into an efficient, mechanized operation with half the workforce and triple the chemical inputs. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her grandfather's insistence on keeping the tractor hadn't been mere sentimentality. Jackson Hartwell had been many things: stubborn, private, occasionally frustrating, but never impractical. If he had emphasized the importance of the Model 60 with such vehemence, there had to be a reason. Which is why Emma now found herself conducting a final inspection of the restored tractor, preparing for its first start in nearly a decade. The restoration had been painstaking: new wiring, rebuilt carburetor, replaced gaskets, fresh fluids throughout. She'd even repainted the wheel hubs the original John Deere green, though she'd left the faded, rusted body untouched, respecting the machine's history and her limited budget. "Okay, old girl," Emma said, patting the worn metal fender. "Let's see if Grandpa was right about you." She climbed onto the metal seat, feeling it shift slightly beneath her weight. The barn around her was nearly as old as the farm itself, its wooden structure showing the accumulated fatigue of a century of Midwest seasons. The floorboards, once solid oak, had softened in places from decades of moisture seeping through the increasingly compromised roof. Emma had meant to replace the worst sections, but limited funds had forced her to prioritize revenue-generating repairs over structural maintenance. With a deep breath, she turned the key in the ignition and pressed the starter button. The engine coughed, protested, then caught with a roar that sent a startled family of barn swallows swooping from their nests in the rafters. Blue smoke billowed briefly from the exhaust stack before clearing as the engine settled into a surprisingly smooth idle. "I'll be damned," Emma whispered, a smile breaking across her face for the first time in weeks. The vibration of the running tractor transmitted through the seat and into her body, a tangible connection to her grandfather who had sat in this same spot decades earlier. The success was intoxicating after so many failures. Careful not to flood the engine, Emma eased the clutch out and tentatively engaged the transmission. The massive rear wheels turned, and the tractor began to inch forward toward the barn doors and the sunlit farmyard beyond. She had moved perhaps 10 feet when a sound like a gunshot cracked through the barn, followed immediately by a sickening, splintering noise. The tractor's front wheels remained level, but the heavier rear end suddenly tilted backward, throwing Emma forward against the steering wheel as the back of the tractor crashed through the weakened floorboards. Instinctively, she cut the engine and jumped clear, landing hard on her side on the intact portion of the flooring. Heart hammering in her chest, she scrambled to her feet and surveyed the damage. The tractor's rear end had disappeared into a dark hole where the floor had been. The front wheels and engine block pointed skyward at a 45-degree angle. "No, no, no," Emma groaned, envisioning her last financial hope literally sinking. before her eyes. She approached the edge of the broken flooring cautiously, testing each step. The beam of sunlight streaming through the barn doors illuminated floating dust particles, but failed to penetrate the darkness below. Emma pulled her phone from her pocket and activated the flashlight function, aiming it into the void. What she saw made her gasp and take an involuntary step backward. The tractor hadn't crashed into a root cellar or drainage area as she might have expected. Instead, the beam of light revealed what appeared to be a concrete room, extending well beyond the reach of her light. Metal fixtures gleamed dully in the limited illumination. The tractor's rear wheels rested on what looked like a massive metal hatch or door that had been concealed beneath the barn floor. "What on earth?" Emma whispered, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Crouching at the edge of the broken floor, she directed her light methodically across what she could see of the space below. The room was clearly man-made, with reinforced concrete walls, and what appeared to be electrical conduits running along their surface. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was no natural cavity or forgotten storage space. This was an engineered structure, purposefully built and deliberately hidden. Emma's mind raced. The farm had been in her family since 1919. Her great-grandfather had built the barn himself in the early 1920s. There was no record or family story about an underground structure, yet here it was, large enough to suggest it extended well beyond the footprint of the barn itself, a massive secret literally underfoot for generations. Then a connection clicked. Her grandfather's military service, the cryptic journal entries, his insistence on keeping the tractor, a tractor heavy enough to break through a floor that had likely been engineered to conceal whatever lay beneath. "The Model 60 is the key," she repeated his words aloud, their meaning suddenly transforming from metaphorical to literal. With trembling fingers, Emma called the only person she trusted with something this potentially significant. Her cousin Nathan, a contractor who lived in the neighboring county, answered on the third ring. "Nate, I need you to come out to the farm right now," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Bring your work headlamps and that heavy-duty construction rope you used for the Johnson silo project." "What's going on, Em?" Nathan's voice carried the wariness of someone who had witnessed his cousin's increasing desperation over recent months. "The tractor broke through the barn floor," she explained, eyes still fixed on the darkness below. "But it's not just a cellar or damaged foundation. There's some kind of facility down there, a room with metal and concrete. It looks military." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Emma checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Nate?" "I'm here," he replied finally. "Are you saying there's some kind of bunker under the barn, like a fallout shelter?" "This is way bigger than a fallout shelter," Emma said. "And given Grandpa's mysterious government work and his obsession with keeping that specific tractor on the property, I don't think this is a coincidence." "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Nathan said, his tone now matching her urgency. "Don't go down there alone, Em. We have no idea what structural damage the tractor might have caused." After ending the call, Emma retreated to the farmhouse to gather supplies. The modest two-story structure had been built in the 1890s, its white-clappered exterior now faded and peeling in the harsh Midwestern sun. Inside, the rooms bore the imprint of multiple generations. Her grandmother's quilts draped over her father's recliner, her own modern laptop incongruous on the antique oak desk that had belonged to her great-grandfather. Emma pulled a dusty duffel bag from the hall closet and began collecting items. Work gloves, a first aid kit, spare batteries for the flashlights, a digital camera. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced with questions. What was hidden beneath the family farm? Why had her grandfather kept it secret even from his own son? And perhaps most pressingly, What would it mean for the imminent foreclosure? As she zipped the duffel closed, Emma glanced at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator, its July 15th square circled in red, the final day before the bank would officially begin foreclosure proceedings. 22 days, just over 3 weeks to somehow find enough money to at least negotiate an extension. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent the last of her accessible funds restoring the very tractor that now sat half-swallowed by whatever secret her grandfather had kept buried all these years. Nathan arrived in 35 minutes, his truck kicking up a cloud of dust as it sped down the long gravel driveway. Emma met him at the barn, where he whistled low at the sight of the tractor's precarious position. "Well, I'd say that restoration was a success if it's still running after a fall like that," he quipped, though his expression remained serious as he assessed the broken flooring. "You weren't kidding about this being something big." Together, they secured ropes to the barn's structural beams and tested their weight capacity. Nathan, with his construction experience, identified the areas of flooring still stable enough to support them and created a makeshift harness system that would allow them to descend safely into the opening. "I still think we should call someone," he said as they prepared their headlamps. "County emergency services, maybe." Emma shook her head firmly. "Not until we know what we're dealing with. This is still Hartwell property, and with the bank breathing down my neck, the last thing I need is government officials or emergency services deciding this land needs to be seized for some reason." Nathan didn't look convinced, but he nodded, reluctantly. "Your farm, your call. But we go down together, we stay within sight of each other, and at the first sign of anything dangerous, structural instability, chemicals, whatever, we're out of there and calling professionals. Deal?" "Deal," Emma agreed, securing her headlamp. The descent was surprisingly straightforward, with the broken floor creating an opening large enough for them to maneuver around the tractor. As their feet touched the concrete floor approximately 12 feet below the barn, their headlamps illuminated a scene that exceeded Emma's wildest speculations. They stood in what appeared to be an entrance chamber to a much larger facility. Reinforced concrete walls surrounded them, with heavy metal doors bearing faded stenciled numbers along one side. The ceiling, what would have been the underside of the barn floor, had clearly been designed as a concealed hatch, with the broken section revealing the clever construction that had disguised it as ordinary flooring. "Holy," Nathan whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "This isn't some little bomb shelter, Em. This is military-grade construction." Emma moved carefully around the back end of the tractor, which had come to rest on what now was clearly identifiable as a large metal hatch designed to roll or slide open. The heavy vehicle had crashed directly onto its center, denting but not completely breaking through the structure. "Look at this," she called, directing her light toward a faded insignia on the wall beside what appeared to be a control panel. The symbol showed an eagle clutching lightning bolts, surrounded by text too degraded to read completely, though the words command and strategic were still visible. "Strategic Air Command," Nathan suggested, moving closer to examine the panel. "That was Cold War era, wasn't it?" Emma nodded, memories of her grandfather's few shared stories surfacing. He was stationed at a SAC base for a while in the early 60s, before he came back to take over the farm when his father got sick. He never talked much about what he did there. "Apparently, he did more than just talk," Nathan muttered, gesturing broadly at their surroundings. "The question is, what exactly is here, and why is it under your barn?" Emma approached one of the metal doors, noting a keypad mounted beside it, and surprisingly sophisticated feature for something that must have been installed no later than the 1960s. The keypad showed no signs of power, its buttons coated with decades of undisturbed dust. "Let's see where these lead," she said, grasping the heavy handle and pulling. To her surprise, the door swung open with only minimal resistance, its hinges apparently designed for longevity, even without maintenance. Beyond lay a corridor stretching into darkness, with more doors visible along its length. Emma and Nathan exchanged a glance before cautiously proceeding, their headlamps creating overlapping cones of light that revealed a facility far more extensive than either had imagined possible. The first room they entered appeared to be some kind of communication center. Bulky equipment lined the walls. Control panels with hundreds of switches and dials sat beneath what must have been monitoring screens, and desk stations were positioned in precise rows across the room's center. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for decades, except for a single path through the center that showed signs of occasional passage. "Someone's been down here," Emma whispered, pointing to the faint footprints visible in the dust. The tracks appeared to lead from the door they'd entered through to a large console at the far end of the room. "Recently?" Nathan asked, crouching, to examine the marks more closely. Emma shook her head. "Not very recent. There's a fine layer of dust even over these tracks, but definitely years, not decades." The realization sent a chill through her. Grandpa died 7 years ago. Dree. They followed the faint trail to the central console, where the dust had been disturbed more extensively around what appeared to be a primary control station. A leather-bound journal lay on the console, positioned carefully beside a panel of switches protected by a clear plastic cover. "That's Grandpa's handwriting," Emma said, recognizing the distinctive script on the journal's cover. She gently lifted it, wiping away dust with her gloved hand. "Property of J. Hartwell, technical maintenance records, classification level, Umbra." "What's Umbra?" Nathan asked, examining the control panel without touching it. "No idea. Some kind of security classification, I guess." Emma carefully opened the journal, mindful of the brittle pages. The first entry was dated June 15, 1963. Initial system installation complete. Blackfish communication array operational at 87% capacity. Power distribution from primary grid established with secondary and tertiary backups in place. Farm cover remains intact and unsuspected. Command satisfied with site security protocols. Emma flipped forward through the journal, scanning entries that detailed technical maintenance, system adjustments, and occasional visits from personnel identified only by code names. Then she stopped at an entry from November 1964. "Project officially decommissioned today per Pentagon. Directive: received orders to seal facility and destroy all operational components. Implemented protocol deep store instead, with Commander Wilson's unofficial authorization. Official records will show complete decommissioning. Actual status: dormant but preserved. Some technologies too valuable to lose to political winds." "Emma?" Nathan called from across the room, where he'd been examining another section of equipment. "You need to see this." She joined him in front of what appeared to be a large map table, though instead of paper maps, it featured an intricate array of miniature lights embedded beneath a glass surface etched with geographical outlines. "That's Oak Ridge County," Emma said, recognizing the river systems and topographical features. "And look, there's our farm." She pointed to a small red light positioned exactly where the Hartwell property would be. "It's not just our county," Nathan said, indicating the larger scale of the map. "This shows most of the Midwest, and every one of these lights." He gestured to dozens of tiny illuminated points scattered across the map. "I'm guessing they're installations like this one." Emma felt the weight of realization settling over her. "A network," she whispered. "Grandpa wasn't just maintaining this facility, he was part of some kind of larger system." They continued exploring, discovering rooms filled with sophisticated electronic equipment, supply areas stocked with long-expired rations and medical supplies, and even small dormitory spaces with military-style bunks. The facility was larger than Emma had imagined possible, extending well beyond the footprint of the barn above. In what appeared to be a technical library, they found shelves of manuals, technical diagrams, and folders marked with various classification levels. Emma pulled one labeled Blackfish System Overview, Technical Specifications, and opened it to find detailed schematics of what appeared to be an advanced communication system. "I don't understand half of these terms," she admitted, flipping through pages filled with technical jargon and complex diagrams. Nathan examined a circuit schematic over her shoulder. "Some of this looks like standard radio technology from that era, but these components..." He pointed to several sections marked with unfamiliar symbols. "I've never seen anything like this, and I rewired my entire workshop last year." Their exploration led them to what was clearly the heart of the facility, a large circular room dominated by a central column filled with equipment racks. The walls were lined with what appeared to be massive transmitter units, each connected to the central column by bundles of cables and waveguides. "This must be Blackfish," Emma said, referencing the system mentioned in her grandfather's journal. "Whatever it is." As they studied the impressive array, a distant metallic groan echoed through the facility, followed by the sound of shifting debris. "The tractor," Nathan said, alarm evident in his voice. "It might be settling further through the opening. We should get back up there and secure it before it causes more damage." Emma nodded reluctantly, torn between the need for safety and her desire to continue exploring this extraordinary discovery. "Let's grab the journal and any other documentation we can carry. We can come back once we've secured the entrance." They hastily collected the journal and several of the technical folders, then made their way back through the facility toward the entrance chamber. As they approached, Emma's phone suddenly buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed only unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Ms. Hartwell?" A crisp, authoritative female voice responded. "This is Colonel Jennifer Reeves with the United States Air Force Strategic Systems Command. We've detected an intrusion alert at a classified installation on your property. Please cease all exploration activities immediately and secure the entrance until our team arrives." Emma froze, meeting Nathan's questioning gaze with wide eyes. "How did you know we're down here?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The facility has automated monitoring systems that, while dormant, remain operational in passive mode," the colonel replied matter-of-factly. "When the entrance integrity was compromised, it triggered a silent alert to our monitoring station. A response team has already been dispatched and will arrive at your location within the hour." "This is private property," Emma countered, a protective instinct flaring. "The facility is under my barn on my family's land. The facility is government property maintained under national security protocols, Ms. Hartwell," Colonel Reeves corrected, her tone cooling noticeably. "Your grandfather was the designated caretaker under a highly classified arrangement. I strongly advise you to exit the installation, secure the compromised entrance as best you can, and await our team's arrival. Please do not remove any materials or equipment from the premises." The call ended before Emma could respond. She lowered the phone slowly, meeting Nathan's expectant gaze. "We're about to have company," she said, quickly explaining the call. "Military. They say they'll be here within the hour." Nathan's expression hardened. "So much for keeping this quiet. What do you want to do?" Emma glanced down at the journal and folders in her hands, then back up at her cousin. "Get back up top and document everything we can before they arrive. If this facility has been here all along, and Grandpa was its official caretaker, there might be legal implications for the farm's status. I'm not handing anything over until I understand what we're dealing with." They climbed back up through the opening, carefully avoiding the still precariously positioned tractor. Once above ground, Emma quickly photographed everything they'd collected while Nathan used his phone to take video footage of the facility visible through the opening. "We should move the tractor before it falls all the way through," Nathan suggested, eyeing the heavy machine warily. Emma shook her head. "No time, and we might cause more damage. Let the military deal with it. They're the ones who built this thing under our barn." They retreated to the farmhouse, where Emma hurriedly scanned the most important-looking documents using her aging printer's scanner function, storing digital copies on both her laptop and a separate USB drive, which she then hid in a hollowed-out copy of Old Yeller on her bookshelf, a hiding place she'd used as a child for her diary. 43 minutes after the phone call, the distinct sound of approaching vehicles drew them to the front porch. 3 black SUVs with government plates led a small convoy that included what appeared to be a specialized equipment truck and 2 military Humvees. They turned up the gravel driveway with precision, dust billowing behind their tires. "Here we go," Emma murmured, straightening her shoulders as the vehicles came to a stop in the farmyard. She felt a surge of protectiveness, not just for the physical property, but for her grandfather's legacy and whatever role he had played in the secret beneath their land. The door of the lead SUV opened, and a woman in her late 40s emerged. She wore dark blue tactical pants and a matching shirt with no visible insignia, but her bearing unmistakably marked her as military. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to command. "Ms. Hartwell," she called, approaching the porch. "I'm Colonel Jennifer Reeves. We spoke earlier." Emma descended the porch steps to meet her, conscious of Nathan following supportively behind. "Colonel, I wish I could say this visit was expected, but until about an hour ago, I had no idea there was a secret military installation under my barn." Reeves nodded, her expression professionally neutral. "I understand this comes as a surprise. Your grandfather was under strict security protocols, never to reveal the facility's existence, even to family. And yet he was maintaining it all along," Emma countered, holding up the journal they'd recovered. According to his records, long after it was supposedly decommissioned. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps or concern, crossed the colonel's face before her professional mask returned. "May I see that, please?" "You can see it right here," Emma replied, not extending the journal. "This is still my property, Colonel. I'd like to understand exactly what's going on before I start handing things over." Behind Reeves, the other vehicles had disgorged their occupants, a mix of individuals in similar tactical clothing and others in what appeared to be specialized technical gear. They stood at a respectful distance, clearly awaiting instructions. Reeves studied Emma for a moment, then nodded slightly as if coming to a decision. "Your grandfather, Technical Sergeant Jackson Hartwell, was assigned to Project Blackfish in 1962. When the project was officially decommissioned in 1964, he was one of several key personnel who implemented what was called Protocol Deep Store. Essentially, preserving the technology instead of destroying it as ordered. "Why?" Emma asked, genuinely curious now. "What was so important about this Blackfish system?" "That's classified information, Ms. Hartwell," Reeves replied automatically, then appeared to reconsider. "However, given the circumstances, I can tell you that Blackfish was decades ahead of its time. A communication system capable of maintaining secure transmissions even in environments where conventional radio would be rendered useless." "Such as during a nuclear attack," Nathan suggested quietly. Reeves's sharp glance confirmed his speculation, without her needing to verbalize it. "Your grandfather believed the technology was too valuable to lose to political shifts," she continued, addressing Emma again. "He and several other project scientists and engineers implemented Deep Store against official orders. creating the fiction that these installations had been decommissioned while actually preserving them in dormant status. Emma processed this information, thinking of her practical, rule-following grandfather secretly maintaining an illegal military installation for decades. And no one checked? The military just took his word that everything was destroyed? A ghost of a smile touched Reeves's lips. Official inspections were conducted, of course. But Technical Sergeant Hartwell had thoroughly prepared for them. The facility has certain features that made it appear decommissioned to anyone who didn't know exactly what to look for. And all this time it's been sending out monitoring signals, Emma pressed. Passive monitoring only, Reeves clarified, designed to activate only if the facility's integrity was compromised or if certain emergency conditions were met. Until today, this particular node has been silent for decades. Emma glanced back at the barn, where several of Reeves's team were now setting up portable lighting equipment around the opening. So what happens now? Do you shut it down for real this time? Remove it? That will be determined after we've conducted a complete assessment, Reeves answered diplomatically. For now, I need to ask you and Mr. Hartwell, Nathan supplied. Nathan Hartwell. I'm Emma's cousin. Mr. Hartwell, to allow my team access to the facility and to turn over any materials you've removed from it. Emma weighed her options. The military clearly had some legal claim to the installation itself, but she wasn't ready to surrender everything without understanding the implications for her farm. I'll cooperate with your assessment, Colonel, she said finally. But I want to be involved. This is still my property. And whatever arrangement existed between the government and my grandfather clearly wasn't well documented in public records. Before I turn over anything, I want written assurance that my ownership of this land isn't in jeopardy. Reeves raised an eyebrow, clearly not accustomed to conditions being placed on her operations. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. Curtly, I can arrange for appropriate documentation regarding property rights. However, the contents of the facility and any technical information remain classified. Understood, Emma agreed, sensing this was the best compromise she would get. There's something else you should know. The bank is foreclosing on this property in 3 weeks. Whatever happens with this facility, it needs to happen before Mid-American Agricultural Enterprises takes possession. This information clearly disturbed the colonel, her professional demeanor slipping momentarily. That complicates matters significantly, she admitted. Who is your mortgage holder? Oak Ridge County Bank, Emma replied. But they've already sold the note to Mid-American's financial division. They've been buying up all the struggling farms in the area. Reeves turned slightly, nodding to one of her team members, who immediately pulled out a phone and stepped away. To make a call. We'll need to address that immediately, she said, turning back to Emma. A classified military installation cannot be allowed to fall into corporate hands, especially not through standard foreclosure procedures. A spark of hope flared in Emma's chest. Could this bizarre discovery actually save the farm? She tamped down the feeling, unwilling to get ahead of herself. My technical team needs to conduct an initial assessment, Reeves continued, all business again. I'd like you to show them exactly how you accessed the facility and what areas you've explored. Emma nodded, leading the way to the barn. A team of 4 specialists followed, carrying sophisticated equipment in hardened cases. Nathan fell into step beside her. You think this might stop the foreclosure? He whispered. I don't know, Emma replied honestly, but it's the first leverage we've had in 3 years. Inside the barn, Reeves' team had already established a secure perimeter around the opening and set up powerful lights that illuminated the chamber below. The tractor remained precariously balanced, its rear wheels still resting on the damaged hatch. A man in his 50s detached from the group and approached Colonel Reeves. His tactical clothing was identical to the others, but the deference they showed him suggested senior status. Dr. Alan Mercer. Technical assessment lead, Reeves introduced him. Dr. Mercer, this is Emma Hartwell, the property owner and apparently the granddaughter of Technical Sergeant Hartwell. Mercer's eyebrows rose slightly. Hartwell? Jackson Hartwell? Emma nodded, surprised by his reaction. You knew my grandfather? Only by reputation, Mercer clarified. His work on the resonance amplitude modulation systems was legendary within certain circles. I studied some of his principles during my doctoral research, the unclassified portions at least. Pride warmed Emma's chest at this unexpected testament to her grandfather's accomplishments. Jackson Hartwell had never boasted or even mentioned his technical achievements, presenting himself as a simple farmer who had done a bit of radio work during his military service. Dr. Mercer will lead the technical assessment of the facility, Reeves explained. His team will need to evaluate the current status of all systems and determine whether any can or should be reactivated for proper analysis. Reactivated? Emma questioned. I thought this was just about securing the facility. Mercer and Reeves exchanged a look that Emma couldn't fully interpret. Blackfish technology remains relevant to certain national security interests, Reeves said carefully. If the systems have been preserved as effectively as your grandfather's journal suggests, there may be valuable technical data that could benefit current projects. Now, I'm really curious what this thing actually does, Emma said, watching as Dr. Mercer's team efficiently established a more permanent access route into the facility, carefully stabilizing the tractor and creating a secure entryway around it. Dr. Mercer paused in his supervision of the operation. The simplest explanation is that Blackfish was designed to maintain secure communications during scenarios where conventional systems would fail, he offered, seemingly weighing how much he could reveal. But that vastly understates its significance. The quantum entanglement principles your grandfather helped pioneer represented a paradigm shift in communications theory. Quantum entanglement, Emma repeated. Like particles communicating instantaneously, regardless of distance? Mercer looked impressed. You understand the basic concept. Agricultural engineering degree, Emma explained with a modest shrug. We had to take more physics than you'd expect, but I thought quantum entanglement communication was still theoretical, even today. Officially, it largely is, Mercer acknowledged, which makes what your grandfather and his colleagues achieved in the early 60s all the more remarkable. They developed working prototypes that demonstrated principles many modern physicists still consider impossible to implement, practically. Today, Colonel Reeves rejoined them, having completed a series of calls. Ms. Hartwell, I've initiated contact with financial oversight authorities regarding your foreclosure situation. Given the classified nature of this installation, we have grounds to intervene in the property transfer, at least temporarily. Emma felt a surge of hope. Does that mean you can stop the foreclosure? Not exactly, Reeves clarified, but we can freeze the process pending national security review, which gives us time to establish a more permanent solution. I should warn you, though, this may involve the government exercising eminent domain rights over this property. Meaning, what? You take my farm? The hope in Emma's chest curdled into familiar disappointment. With fair compensation, of course, Reeves added, apparently mistaking the source of Emma's concern. Given the unique circumstances, you would likely receive well above market value. The money isn't the point, Emma said, frustration edging her voice. This land has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather built this barn by hand, My grandfather clearly dedicated his life to protecting whatever's down there while still maintaining this farm. I don't want to sell to the bank, to Mid-American, or to the government. Reeves's expression softened slightly. I understand your attachment, Ms. Hartwell. But the reality is that Blackfish represents technologies with significant national security implications. We can't simply leave a classified installation in private hands, especially with the financial vulnerabilities you're facing. Before Emma could respond, one of the technical team emerged from the opening, approaching Dr. Mercer with evident excitement. Sir, you need to see this, the specialist said, handing Mercer a tablet displaying what appeared to be diagnostic readings. The main system core is intact, not just preserved, but actively maintained. There's evidence of regular power cycling and system checks as recently as 5 years ago. Mercer studied the data with growing astonishment. That's impossible. Sergeant Hartwell died 7 years ago. Emma and Nathan exchanged a significant look. Grandpa's journal mentioned something called automated maintenance protocols, Emma offered. Could the system have been maintaining itself? Not at this level of preservation, Mercer replied, shaking his head. These readings suggest manual optimization and physical component replacement. Someone has been actively maintaining this facility. All eyes turned to Emma, who raised her hands defensively. Don't look at me. Until today, I had no idea any of this existed. Is there anyone else who had access to the property? Colonel, Reeves asked, anyone your grandfather might have trusted with this responsibility? Emma started to shake her head, then stopped as a memory surfaced. Frank Wilson, she said slowly. Our neighbor. His father served with my grandfather. They were stationed together before both returning to take over their family farms. Mr. Wilson Sr. died about 10 years ago, but Frank still runs the neighboring property. The same Frank Wilson who sold to Mid-American last year? Nathan asked. The very same, Emma confirmed. He always seemed to have a special relationship with Grandpa. They'd disappear into the barn for hours sometimes when I was a kid. Dad always said they were tinkering with the old equipment, but now I wonder. Reeves was already moving toward the SUV, speaking rapidly into her communications device. I need immediate background on Frank Wilson of Oak Ridge County. Property borders the Hartwell farm to the east. Check for military service records, security clearances, any connection to Blackfish or related projects. While Reeves pursued this new lead, Dr. Mercer invited Emma to accompany his team into the facility for a more comprehensive assessment. They descended through the now properly secured entrance, the specialists bringing advanced diagnostic equipment that they quickly connected to various systems throughout the installation. In the main control room, Mercer's team removed protective coverings from equipment Emma hadn't noticed during her initial exploration. Hidden beneath dusty tarps were surprisingly modern-looking computer terminals, far more advanced than the 1960s technology that dominated most of the facility. Upgrade components, Mercer explained, noting Emma's confusion. Your grandfather and his colleagues apparently continued to enhance the original systems with newer technology as it became available. These terminals probably date from the late 1990s or early 2000s. One of the specialists had managed to activate a main control console, which illuminated with a soft blue glow. Power systems responding at 62% capacity, she reported. Remarkable for a facility this age, the geothermal backup appears to have maintained minimal operations for years. Geothermal? Emma questioned. There's no geothermal activity in this region. Not naturally, Mercer agreed. But your grandfather's team apparently installed an artificial system, essentially a deep earth heat exchanger that converts temperature differential into usable power. It's vastly more sophisticated than anything commercially available even today. As the technical team continued their assessment, Emma found herself drawn to a section of the facility they hadn't explored during their initial visit. A heavy door marked primary array access. Unlike the other doors, this one featured not just a keypad, but also what appeared to be a biometric scanner. "Dr. Mercer," she called. "What's behind this door?" Mercer joined her, excitement visible beneath his professional demeanor. "If the facility schematics are accurate, that should lead to the heart of Blackfish, the quantum entanglement array itself." He examined the security panel with evident frustration. "This level of security suggests it's particularly sensitive. My team will need time to bypass these systems safely." Emma studied the panel, noticing something curious about the fingerprint scanner. Unlike the dust-covered keypad, the scanner's surface appeared relatively clean, as if it had been used more recently. "Maybe we don't need to bypass it," she suggested, reaching toward the scanner. "Ms. Hartwell, I wouldn't recommend," Mercer began, but Emma had already pressed her palm against the scanner's surface. The panel remained dark for several seconds, then suddenly illuminated with green light. A mechanical click sounded from within the door, followed by the hiss of an airtight seal releasing. "Genetic verification confirmed," announced an automated voice from a hidden speaker. "Welcome, Hartwell family designee." The heavy door swung slowly inward, revealing a circular chamber unlike anything Emma had seen in the rest of the facility. The room was dominated by a central column that rose from floor to ceiling, surrounded by concentric rings of what appeared to be copper and crystalline components. The entire array pulsed with subtle blue light, casting otherworldly patterns across the polished metal walls. "My God," Mercer whispered, genuine awe replacing his scientific detachment. "It's actually operational. A functioning quantum entanglement array, preserved all these years." Emma stepped cautiously into the chamber, drawn by an inexplicable sense of familiarity. The air carried a faint electrical scent, reminiscent of the atmosphere after a lightning storm. As she approached the central column, she noticed an inscription engraved into its base. "Communications exist that no enemy can stop. No power on Earth can separate what quantum physics has joined together. May this work serve to connect rather than control. J.H." "My grandfather's initials," Emma said softly, tracing the engraved letters with her fingertip. A resonant hum emanated from the array as her hand made contact with the metal, the blue pulsing light intensifying noticeably. Mercer's team immediately began checking their instruments, expressions of alarm turning to amazement. "The system is responding to her presence," one specialist reported incredulously. "Power levels increasing to 78%, 85%, stabilizing at 91%. The quantum field is coherent and expanding." "Expanding to where?" Mercer demanded. The specialist studied his readings with growing excitement. "Everywhere. The quantum field is establishing connections with something. Multiple somethings. Actually, signal patterns suggest other Blackfish nodes are coming online in response." Colonel Reeves chose that moment to enter the chamber, stopping abruptly at the sight of the activated array. "What's happening here? Who authorized activation procedures?" "It activated in response to Ms. Hartwell," Mercer explained, gesturing toward Emma, who still stood transfixed beside the central column. "The system appears to have been keyed to Hartwell family genetic markers, and Colonel, it's communicating with other nodes." Reeves's expression shifted from concern to calculating assessment. "How many other nodes? Where?" The specialist consulted his tablet, difficult to pinpoint exactly due to the nature of quantum entanglement, but signal patterns suggest at least 7 active nodes within a 500-mile radius. They appear to be responding to our node's reactivation. 7 other facilities just like this one, Emma murmured, remembering the map they'd discovered earlier with its pattern of illuminated points. All hidden under farms or ordinary buildings, all preserved in secret. Reeves moved closer to the array, studying it with the intense focus of someone reassessing a complex strategic situation. Dr. Mercer, what are the security implications here? Could this technology be compromised or weaponized if it fell into the wrong hands? Mercer considered the question carefully. The quantum entanglement principles themselves are inherently secure. You can't intercept or jam communications that don't actually travel through conventional space. But the applications of this technology go far beyond secure communications. The ability to transmit information instantaneously across any distance without physical infrastructure. The strategic and commercial implications are staggering. Which is why it was buried in the first place, Emma concluded, pieces finally fitting together in her mind. Not just because of Cold War secrecy, but because it would have disrupted too many powerful interests. Telecommunications companies, satellite operators, intelligence agencies, they all had reasons to prefer existing technologies they could control and monitor. Reeves didn't confirm or deny this assessment, but her expression suggested Emma had struck close to the truth. Ms. Hartwell, I need to escalate this situation to higher authorities immediately. The reactivation of a Blackfish network goes well beyond our initial containment mission. As Reeves stepped away to make her calls, Emma continued exploring the chamber, drawn to a workstation positioned near the array's outer ring. Unlike the dusty consoles in the other rooms, this station showed signs of recent use. A chair positioned at a comfortable working distance, surfaces relatively clean. Even a coffee mug bearing the faded logo of the Oak Ridge County Fair from 2016. Someone was definitely maintaining this, she said, picking up a notebook that lay beside a monitoring screen. The handwriting wasn't her grandfather's familiar script, but it did seem vaguely familiar. The technical notes detailed maintenance procedures and system checks dating as recently as 4 months ago. Flipping to the most recent entry, Emma read, April 18, 2023, main array efficiency at 87%, replaced quantum stabilizer module in Sector 3 with salvage components from Westfield node, network integrity maintained, no detection events from surveillance. Systems. Jay would be proud of how we've kept his legacy alive. Time grows short, though. Corporate acquisition of surrounding properties proceeding faster than anticipated may need to accelerate the restoration protocol timeline. Restoration protocol, Emma repeated aloud, catching Dr. Mercer's attention. What's that? He asked, joining her at the workstation. Emma handed him the notebook. Maintenance logs from whoever's been keeping this place running. They mention something called the Restoration Protocol and express concern about corporate acquisition of surrounding properties. Mercer scanned the entry, his expression growing increasingly troubled. This suggests a coordinated plan involving multiple Blackfish nodes. The reference to the Westfield node indicates they're sharing resources and components between facilities. He looked up at Emma. Your neighbor, Frank Wilson, you said he sold to Mid-American last year? Emma nodded. Yes, after holding out longer than most. He got a significantly better price than what they initially offered, though. Enough to retire comfortably in Florida, according to local gossip. And then Mid-American began acquiring more properties in the area? They've been on a buying spree for about 18 months now, Emma confirmed. My farm is one of the last independent properties in the county. Mercer's gaze shifted to the central array, his scientific mind clearly racing through implications. What if selling to Mid-American wasn't Wilson abandoning his post? What if it was strategic, a way to observe their operations from the inside? Before Emma could respond to this intriguing theory, one of the specialists monitoring the array called out urgently, Dr. Mercer, we're detecting a significant change in the quantum field. The network is implementing some kind of automated protocol. The blue light pulsing through the array suddenly intensified, shifting toward violet. The concentric rings began rotating in alternating directions, their speed gradually increasing, as the hum deepened to a resonant frequency that Emma could feel in her chest. "What's happening?" she asked, alarmed by the dramatic change. Mercer rushed to the monitoring station, studying the rapidly changing data with growing concern. "The system is generating a quantum field far beyond anything we anticipated. It's expanding exponentially, already extending several miles beyond this facility." Colonel Reeves returned at that moment, immediately assessing the situation. "Shut it down," she ordered sharply. "Full system disconnect now." The technical team sprang into action, attempting to access the system controls, but their efforts appeared ineffective. The array continued its activation sequence, the violet light now so intense it cast sharp-edged shadows throughout the chamber. "We can't interrupt the process," one specialist reported, frustration evident. "The system has locked us out. It appears to be executing a pre-programmed protocol." "The restoration protocol," Emma suggested, connecting the reference in the maintenance log to the current activity. A new voice spoke from the chamber entrance, causing everyone to turn in surprise. "Exactly right, Emma. Your grandfather would be proud of your quick understanding." Frank Wilson stood in the doorway, looking nothing like the weathered farmer Emma had known all her life. His normally rumpled appearance had been replaced by the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. Behind him stood two individuals in tactical gear, similar to Colonel Reeves' team, but with subtle differences that marked them as separate operators. "Mr. Wilson," Reeves said, her hand moving subtly toward her sidearm, "this is a classified military installation. Your presence here is unauthorized." Wilson smiled, seemingly unconcerned by her implied threat. "On the contrary, Colonel. My authorization to this facility predates yours by several decades." Technical Sergeant James Wilson, Army Signal Corps, officially assigned to Project Blackfish in 1962 and unofficially maintaining it ever since, alongside my good friend Jackson Hartwell. He nodded respectfully toward Emma. "Your grandfather was an extraordinary man, Emma. He would be pleased to see you standing in this chamber today." Emma struggled to reconcile this sophisticated, authoritative version of her neighbor with the straightforward farmer she'd known her entire life. "You've been maintaining this facility all along, even after Grandpa died?" Wilson nodded. "Jackson and I were part of the original Deep Store team. 8 engineers and scientists who couldn't bear to see this technology buried by political expediency. We each took responsibility for one node, passing the knowledge down through our families when possible. When Jackson realized your father wasn't suited for the responsibility, we made alternative arrangements." "What is this restoration protocol?" Dr. Mercer demanded, gesturing toward the increasingly active array. Wilson turned his attention to the scientist, assessing him thoughtfully. "Simply put, Doctor, it's the fulfillment of Blackfish's original purpose, a communications network impervious to conventional interference or surveillance, accessible to ordinary citizens rather than controlled by governments or corporations." "You're activating a classified military system for civilian use?" Reeves asked incredulously. "That's treason, Sergeant." "It would be if Blackfish were still officially a military system," Wilson countered calmly. "But according to all official records, these facilities were decommissioned in 1964. The technology we preserved belongs to the American people, not to corporate interests or government agencies who abandoned it." Emma studied Frank Wilson with new eyes, reconciling the straightforward farmer she'd known her entire life with this clearly sophisticated technological guardian. The calm assurance with which he moved through the highly classified facility suggested decades of intimate familiarity with its systems. "Mr. Wilson, regardless of your personal beliefs, This remains classified technology, Colonel Reeves stated firmly. Your unauthorized maintenance of this facility and apparent activation of a national security asset constitutes a serious breach of federal law. Wilson seemed unconcerned by her warning. Colonel, I understand your position, but I believe we share a more immediate concern. He gestured toward the increasingly active array. The restoration protocol has initiated and cannot be easily halted. Perhaps we should focus on understanding what's happening before debating jurisdictional questions. Dr. Mercer, whose scientific curiosity appeared to be overriding his official caution, nodded in agreement. The quantum field is expanding at an exponential rate. We should monitor its effects carefully before attempting any intervention. Emma approached one of the monitoring stations where data streamed across screens in complex patterns. What exactly does this restoration protocol do? What's being restored? Wilson joined her, pointing to a map display where pulsing blue circles were beginning to appear across a regional map. Blackfish was designed as a distributed communications network immune to conventional disruption. The protocol re-establishes connections between surviving nodes, creating an integrated quantum field that can function independently of traditional infrastructure. Like an alternative to the internet, Emma suggested, trying to conceptualize the implications. Far more revolutionary, Wilson replied. The internet requires physical infrastructure, cables, servers, satellites, all controlled by governments or corporations. Blackfish operates through quantum entanglement, creating instantaneous connections without physical transmission pathways. It can't be monitored, controlled, or restricted by any centralized authority. Colonel Reeves had been receiving updates through her earpiece, her expression growing increasingly concerned. We're receiving reports of telecommunications anomalies throughout the region. Mobile networks experiencing unexplained signal strength. Increases. Satellite communication systems detecting unidentified bandwidth expansion. Whatever this protocol is doing, it's already affecting civilian infrastructure. One of the specialists monitoring the array called out, "Quantum field, coherence at 87% and rising. Geographic coverage now extends approximately 15 miles in all directions from this facility." 15 miles? Emma repeated, astonished. You mean this is affecting everything within 15 miles of my farm right now? Dr. Mercer nodded, his scientific fascination evident. The quantum field is establishing itself throughout the region, creating what appears to be an alternative communications layer that overlaps with, but operates independently from conventional systems. And it's growing, added the specialist, coverage radius expanding at approximately 2 miles per hour and accelerating. Before anyone could respond to this revelation, a new voice spoke from the entrance to the chamber. Field expansion is proceeding exactly as projected in the original Blackfish specifications. All eyes turned to see an elderly woman standing in the doorway, supported by a younger man who bore a striking resemblance to Frank Wilson. The woman appeared to be in her late 80s, her white hair cut in a practical bob, her posture slightly stooped, but her eyes sharp and alert behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Eleanor Hoffman," Wilson said, surprised but clearly pleased by her appearance. "I didn't expect you to travel here personally." "Some moments must be witnessed firsthand, Frank," the woman replied, her voice remarkably strong despite her apparent age. She turned her gaze to Emma. "You must be Jackson's granddaughter. He would be proud to see you standing here today." "You knew my grandfather?" Emma asked, moving toward the newcomer. Dr. Hoffman nodded, a smile warming her lined face. "Very well indeed. Jackson Hartwell and I designed the quantum resonance matrices at the heart of Blackfish. He was a brilliant engineer with remarkable foresight." She looked around the chamber with evident satisfaction, and it seems his foresight has been vindicated. Colonel Reeves had placed herself between the new arrivals and the central array, her posture subtly defensive. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. I need to ask who you are and how you gained access to this facility." Dr. Eleanor Hoffman, formerly chief theoretical physicist for Project Blackfish from 1962 to 1964, the elderly woman replied without hesitation. "As for access, I designed the security systems, Colonel. They recognize me even after all these years." She turned to Dr. Mercer. "And you must be from the Pentagon's Quantum Research Division. Your work on entangled particle communication has been impressive, if somewhat constrained by bureaucratic timidity." Mercer looked simultaneously flattered and unnerved by her apparent familiarity with his classified research. "You've been monitoring our work?" "We've been monitoring everything relevant to quantum communications for 60 years, young man," Dr. Hoffman replied, with a hint of amusement. "Did you think we preserved this technology only to let it gather dust? We've been preparing for this moment since the day Blackfish was officially abandoned." The man supporting Dr. Hoffman stepped forward. "Allow me to introduce myself. James Wilson Jr., Frank's son. I've been coordinating the restoration initiative from our facility in Colorado." Emma's head was spinning with these revelations. "You're telling me there's been a secret network of people maintaining these facilities for decades? How many people are involved in this?" The original Deep Store team consisted of 8 key scientists and engineers from Project Blackfish. Dr. Hoffman explained. Each took responsibility for preserving one primary node, recruiting trusted associates as needed over the decades. Most of the original team has passed on now. Jackson was among the last. But their children, grandchildren, and carefully selected colleagues have continued their work. Work that constitutes a massive breach of national security protocols. Colonel Reeves interjected, though her tone suggested she recognized the futility of standard security procedures in this unprecedented situation. Dr. Hoffman regarded the colonel with surprising sympathy. "I understand your position, Colonel Reeves. You're bound by regulations and chains of command that don't account for the extraordinary circumstances we face. But Blackfish exists precisely because we recognize that some technologies are too important to be controlled by shifting political winds or corporate interests." The monitoring system suddenly emitted a series of alert tones. The specialist at the console reported with barely contained excitement, "Quantum coherence has reached 100%. The field has stabilized across the primary coverage area, and we're now detecting active connections with 17 other nodes across the country." Dr. Mercer rushed to examine the data. 17 distinct quantum resonance patterns, each centered on what must be other Blackfish installations. They're linking together, creating an integrated field with overlapping coverage areas. A new display activated on the central monitor, showing a map of the United States with expanding blue circles appearing across multiple states, primarily in the Midwest and Great Plains, but with several visible on both coasts as well. "The quantum network is establishing itself," Dr. Hoffman said with evident satisfaction. "After 60 years of preparation, Blackfish is finally fulfilling its intended purpose." "Which is what exactly?" Emma asked, watching the display with a mixture of awe and apprehension as the blue circles expanded and began to overlap, creating a complex pattern of coverage across the country. Frank Wilson answered, his farmer's practicality giving way to passionate conviction. "Freedom of communication, Emma. Truly free, unmonitorable, uncensorable exchange of information between people anywhere within the network's coverage. No corporate gatekeepers, no government surveillance, no artificial scarcity or tiered access based on ability to pay. You're creating an alternative to the entire telecommunications infrastructure," Colonel Reeves stated, the strategic implications clearly dawning on her. An untraceable, unblockable communications network that bypasses all existing regulatory frameworks. Precisely, Dr. Hoffman confirmed, though alternative suggests it's merely a different option. In reality, once people experience truly free quantum communication, conventional systems will become obsolete for most purposes. The implications of this statement hung in the air as the monitoring systems continued to display the rapidly expanding coverage of the quantum network. According to the data scrolling across the screens, the field now extended nearly 30 miles from the Hartwell farm and was accelerating as it synchronized with the fields. Emanating from other nodes, Dr. Mercer had been studying the technical specifications with growing amazement. The integration with existing consumer technology is remarkably sophisticated, he observed. According to these protocols, ordinary smartphones and computers within the coverage area will automatically connect to the quantum field without requiring any special hardware. That was Jackson's particular genius, Dr. Hoffman said, nodding toward Emma with a look of shared pride. Your grandfather developed the translation matrices that convert quantum states into signals conventional electronics can process. He called it the democratic interface, ensuring that quantum communication wouldn't be limited to those with special equipment or technical knowledge. A specialist monitoring external communications suddenly spoke up. Colonel, we're receiving reports from throughout the coverage area. Cell phones showing unprecedented signal strength in previously dead zones. Internet connections running at speeds far beyond what local infrastructure should support. And all major telecommunications providers reporting unexplained anomalies in their monitoring systems. It's already working, James Wilson Jr. confirmed. Ordinary people are connecting to the quantum network without even realizing it. Their devices are simply finding and using the strongest available signal, which within the coverage area is now the Blackfish field. Colonel Reeves had been engaged in intense communication through her earpiece, clearly receiving a stream of increasingly urgent updates from her superiors. She turned to address the group with military composure that barely masked her concern. The Pentagon is treating this as a potential national security emergency, she announced. Special response teams are being deployed to all identified node locations. I've been ordered to secure this facility and detain everyone involved pending national security review. Dr. Hoffman didn't appear particularly troubled by this declaration. You're welcome to try, Colonel, but I'm afraid it's already too late for conventional containment approaches. The quantum network is self-sustaining once activated. Even if you shut down this node completely, the others will compensate and continue, expanding the field. And good luck explaining to the public why you're taking away their suddenly excellent cell service and internet access, Frank Wilson added with a hint of amusement. Especially in rural areas that have been digitally underserved for decades, Emma had been grappling with the personal implications of these extraordinary events. So, my farm, this facility, is now part of some kind of revolutionary communications network that's spreading across the country. What does that mean for me, for the foreclosure? Frank exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Hoffman before responding. That's actually something we need to discuss, Emma. Your grandfather made specific provisions for this moment. He removed a document folder from his jacket and handed it to her. This contains legal recognition of the Hartwell farm as a historic communications facility of significant national importance, along with federal preservation orders that supersede any foreclosure or forced sale proceedings. Emma opened the folder with trembling hands, finding official-looking documents bearing government seals and signatures. Is this real? The farm is protected. Completely protected, Dr. Hoffman confirmed. Jackson established a preservation trust decades ago, funded through patents he registered under various pseudonyms. The trust activates upon official recognition of the facility's historical status, which these documents provide. The trust not only clears your existing mortgage, Frank added, but establishes ongoing financial support for both maintaining the Blackfish installation and operating the farm above it, according to sustainable principles Jackson outlined. Emma stared at the documents, stunned by this unexpected salvation. After years of fighting a losing battle against foreclosure, her grandfather's secret legacy had suddenly secured her family's land in perpetuity. "There's more," Dr. Hoffman said gently. "Jackson left specific instructions regarding your role in all this. He believed that someday his granddaughter would stand in this chamber, ready to carry forward the work he began. But I'm not a quantum physicist or communications engineer," Emma protested. "I studied agricultural engineering, and even that I haven't used much since coming back to run the farm." "Which makes you perfectly suited for this moment," Dr. Hoffman replied. "Blackfish was never meant to be controlled solely by technical specialists. Its purpose is to serve ordinary people, especially in communities ignored by profit-driven telecommunications companies. Your perspective as both a farmer and an engineer gives you exactly the balanced understanding needed to guide this technology's integration with rural life." Colonel Reeves, who had been following this exchange with growing concern, interrupted. "Whatever personal arrangements Sergeant Hartwell may have made, they don't override national security considerations. This technology and facility remain subject to federal oversight." "Actually, Colonel," Dr. Hoffman countered, "the legal framework established through the Historical Communications Preservation Act of 1988 specifically protects facilities like this from unilateral government seizure. It was a rather obscure piece of legislation that few paid attention to at the time, one of several legal safeguards we quietly put in place over the decades." The monitoring system suddenly displayed a new alert, drawing everyone's attention. The map showing the expanding quantum network had zoomed out to show not just the United States, but portions of Canada and Mexico as well, where additional nodes appeared to be activating. "The North American network is approaching full coverage integration," James Wilson Jr. reported, studying the data. "Estimated time to complete continental coverage, approximately 8 hours." Dr. Mercer, who had been analyzing the technical aspects of the system with growing appreciation, turned to Dr. Hoffman with professional curiosity overriding official caution. "The power requirements for this scale of quantum field generation should be enormous, yet I'm not seeing evidence of massive energy consumption. How is that possible?" Dr. Hoffman smiled, pleased by the question. "Another of Jackson's innovations. The quantum resonance matrices actually generate energy as a byproduct of their primary function, a form of zero-point energy harvesting that becomes increasingly efficient as the network expands. Each node not only powers itself, but contributes excess energy to surrounding systems." "You're saying this network produces energy?" Emma asked, the implications staggering. "Clean, sustainable energy," Frank confirmed. "Each node like this one can generate enough excess power to support approximately 50 average households once fully operational. It's part of what Jackson called the community benefit principle, ensuring that the technology would provide tangible local advantages beyond communication." Colonel Reeves had been receiving additional updates through her earpiece, her expression shifting from concern to resigned acceptance. "My superiors are now describing this as a fait accompli situation. Containment is no longer considered viable given the rate of network expansion and public integration. They're pivoting to a cooperation and influence strategy." "A wise adjustment," Dr. Hoffman remarked. "We've always intended to work with rather than against legitimate government interests. Our objection was to suppression and control of the technology, not to thoughtful regulation of its applications." Emma had moved to one of the workstations, where a message was appearing on the screen. Hartwell node, fully integrated. Primary network expansion, proceeding at 117% of projected. Parameters, local community benefits initializing. Local community benefits? She questioned, looking to Frank for explanation. Watch, he suggested, pointing to another monitor displaying a satellite view of the area surrounding the Hartwell farm. Overlaid on the image was a grid of light, blue lines extending throughout the region, connecting homes, businesses, and public buildings in a complex web. The quantum field doesn't just enable communications, Frank explained. It creates a kind of intelligent awareness of the physical infrastructure within its coverage area. The system is mapping every building, road, power line, and water pipe, creating a comprehensive digital model of the community. For what purpose? Colonel Reeves asked, understandable concern in her voice. Optimization, Dr. Hoffman answered. Blackfish was designed to function as more than just a communications system. In its fully realized form, it becomes a community resource manager, identifying inefficiencies, preventing failures before they occur, and suggesting improvements based on actual usage patterns. As if to demonstrate this capability, the display zoomed in on the county water treatment facility, highlighting a section of the main distribution pipe in yellow. Text appeared beside the highlighted area. Structural integrity compromised, failure predicted within 72 hours, preventative maintenance recommended. The system is already detecting potential infrastructure failures that conventional monitoring missed, James Wilson Jr. noted. This particular warning could prevent a major water main break that would have affected hundreds of households. Emma watched with growing amazement as the system continued to identify various infrastructure issues throughout the county. Power, transformers operating beyond capacity, bridge supports showing early signs of stress, even traffic patterns suggesting the need for signal timing adjustments at certain intersections. It's seeing everything, she whispered, the implications. Both awe-inspiring and slightly unsettling. Not quite everything, Dr. Hoffman clarified. The system respects privacy boundaries established in its founding protocols. It doesn't monitor inside private homes or access personal data without explicit permission. But for public infrastructure and natural systems, its sensing capabilities are unparalleled. The display shifted to show agricultural lands surrounding the Hartwell farm. Overlaid on the fields were detailed heat maps showing soil moisture levels, mineral content, and plant health indicators across hundreds of acres. My God, Emma breathed, her agricultural engineering background immediately recognizing the value of such comprehensive data. This could revolutionize farming practices. The precision resource management alone would transform yields while reducing water usage and chemical inputs. Exactly, Frank agreed. Your grandfather understood that rural communities were being left behind in the digital revolution. He designed Blackfish to provide particular benefits to agricultural regions, not just communication, but practical tools for sustainable land management. Colonel Reeves had been observing these demonstrations with growing thoughtfulness, her initial security concerns gradually giving way to recognition of the system's potential benefits. These capabilities go far beyond what our intelligence suggested was possible with 1960s-era quantum research. You've clearly continued development well beyond the original Blackfish specifications. We've had 60 years, Colonel, Dr. Hoffman replied matter-of-factly, and while we operated in secrecy, we weren't isolated. Every advance in quantum physics, materials science, and computing architecture was studied and adapted where applicable. The system you're seeing today incorporates decades of continuous refinement while remaining true to its founding principles. The chamber suddenly dimmed momentarily as the central array shifted to a deeper blue frequency. The concentric rings, which had been rotating at varying speeds, synchronized into a single harmonious pattern, creating an almost hypnotic effect. "Phase transition complete," announced one of the specialists monitoring the system. "The quantum field has achieved stable resonance across all active nodes. Network integrity self-sustaining at 99.7% reliability." On the main display, the overlapping blue circles representing node coverage had merged into a continuous field, spanning most of the continental United States, with tendrils extending into Canada and Mexico. Points of light, representing individual connections within the field, had multiplied to form a glittering constellation, too dense to distinguish separate users. "How many connections are we seeing?" Emma asked, gesturing toward the display. "Current estimate is approximately 17.3 million devices already connecting through the quantum network," James Wilson Jr. reported. "The adoption curve is exceeding our most optimistic projections by nearly 30%. People's devices are naturally seeking and utilizing the superior connection without requiring any user action." Dr. Mercer, who had been analyzing the system's technical specifications with growing excitement, looked up from his work. "The data transmission speeds are unprecedented. Quantum teleportation of information packets at rates that make fiber optic networks look like dial-up connections. And the latency. It's effectively zero across the entire coverage area. See, distance becomes meaningless when information exists simultaneously at both sending and receiving points," Dr. Hoffman explained. "That was the fundamental insight that drove Blackfish's development. Communication freed from the tyranny of physical transmission limitations." Emma had been contemplating the personal implications of these revelations. "So, what happens now? To my farm? To this facility? To me?" Frank Wilson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's largely up to you, Emma. Your grandfather designated you as the rightful steward of the Hartwell node, but he was careful not to dictate exactly what that role should entail. He believed in individual choice and adaptation to changing circumstances. The legal protections established through the Preservation Trust ensure your farm remains secure regardless of what responsibilities you choose to accept," Dr. Hoffman added. "You could simply allow the facility to function autonomously as part of the larger network, focusing your attention on the agricultural operation above ground. Or," James Wilson Jr. suggested, "you could take a more active role in guiding how Blackfish technology serves this community. Your background in agricultural engineering, combined with your practical farming experience, gives you a valuable perspective many technical specialists lack." Emma moved thoughtfully toward the central array, studying the intricate dance of light and motion at its core. Her grandfather's inscription, "Communications exist that no enemy can stop," seemed to pulse with new significance as she considered her options. "What about Mid-American?" she asked suddenly, turning back to the group. "They've been buying up all the surrounding farms. Once they realize what's happening here, won't they try to interfere or take control somehow?" Frank and Dr. Hoffman exchanged knowing glances. Mid-American's aggressive land acquisition in this region wasn't coincidental, Frank explained. "We've had evidence for several years that certain corporate interests were detecting trace emissions from dormant blackfish nodes. They didn't know exactly what they were finding, but they recognized potentially valuable technology signatures." "You think they've been buying farms to search for more facilities like this one?" Emma asked, the implications dawning on her. "We're certain of it," Dr. Hoffman confirmed. "Though they've been disappointed in their search, the original Blackfish team was extremely careful in disguising the facilities. Without specific knowledge of what to look for, finding a node is nearly impossible, as evidenced by how your discovery was entirely accidental, despite the facility being beneath your feet your entire life. Colonel Reeves, who had been receiving a stream of updates through her communications device, rejoined the conversation. Speaking of corporate interests, I'm being informed that major telecommunications companies are already detecting the network's effects. They're reporting unprecedented disruptions to their monitoring and billing systems throughout the coverage area. The quantum field naturally disrupts conventional data collection methods, James Wilson Jr. explained with a hint of satisfaction. Usage tracking, content monitoring, location data harvesting, none of these surveillance techniques function properly within Blackfish coverage. The architecture simply doesn't allow for the kind of user monitoring that forms the business model of most telecommunications companies. Emma considered this with growing appreciation for her grandfather's foresight. He wasn't just creating better technology, he was designing a system that inherently protected people's privacy and freedom. Precisely, Dr. Hoffman agreed. Jackson believed passionately that communication networks should serve human needs, rather than corporate or governmental control interests. He used to say that true connection requires both technical efficiency and ethical integrity. The monitoring system suddenly registered a new development. Several red indicators appeared across the network map, concentrated in major urban centers. "We're detecting active countermeasures being deployed," reported one of the specialists. "Multiple telecommunications providers attempting to force their hardware to reject quantum field connections. Government agencies implementing signal blockers around sensitive facilities." Dr. Hoffman appeared entirely untroubled by this news. "Right on schedule. The resistance phase is beginning exactly as we anticipated." "You expected this?" Colonel Reeves asked. "Of course," Dr. Hoffman replied. "Entrenched interests never surrender their control willingly. We've been preparing for this response for decades." As if on cue, the central array's rotation pattern shifted slightly, and the blue-white light pulsed in a new rhythm. On the monitoring screens, the red indicators were rapidly surrounded by intensifying blue fields, then gradually faded. "The network is adapting," James Wilson Jr. explained for Emma's benefit. "Each attempted blocking or interference measure is analyzed and incorporated into the system's response algorithms. The quantum field simply reconfigures to bypass or neutralize the countermeasures. It's learning," Emma realized. "The more they try to fight it, the stronger it becomes." "Another of your grandfather's fundamental insights," Dr. Hoffman confirmed. "He understood that true resilience comes not from rigid strength, but from adaptive response. The network doesn't resist opposition, it incorporates and transforms it." Through the facility's monitoring systems, they could see that the situation above ground had grown increasingly complex. Military and government vehicles continued to arrive, establishing a secure perimeter around the Hartwell farm. News helicopters circled at a distance, their cameras trained on the unusual activity. Local residents had gathered at the roadblocks, clearly curious about the sudden interest in their quiet rural community. "Your farm has become ground zero for a technological revolution, Emma," Rank observed, "though I suspect most of those people have no idea what's actually happening beneath their feet." Emma felt a momentary pang of anxiety at finding herself suddenly at the center of such momentous events. "I'm not sure I'm prepared for this kind of attention or responsibility. I'm just a farmer trying to save my family's land." "Which is precisely why Jackson chose you," Dr. Hoffman said gently. "He believed that technology should serve ordinary people's needs, not the other way around. Your practical perspective is exactly what's needed to guide Blackfish's integration into everyday life." Dr. Mercer, who had continued his technical analysis of the system, looked up with an expression of profound realization. The agricultural monitoring functionality isn't just a beneficial side effect. It's integral to the network's operation, isn't it? The quantum field is using plants as biological sensors, creating a symbiotic relationship between the technology and the natural environment. Dr. Hoffman smiled with genuine pleasure at his insight. Very good, Doctor. Yes, living systems, particularly. Plants, with their extensive root networks, serve as both sensors and anchors for the quantum field. Another reason we situated the nodes primarily in agricultural regions. That's why the farm itself is so important, Emma realized. It's not just cover for the facility, it's actually part of how the system functions. Exactly, Frank confirmed. Your grandfather insisted that blackfish technology work with rather than against natural systems. He believed technology should enhance rather than replace our connection to the land. Colonel Reeves had been engaged in what appeared to be increasingly difficult conversations with her superiors. She finally addressed the group with a new sense of pragmatism. My orders have been clarified. Given the apparent irreversibility of the current situation, I'm to establish a cooperative relationship with the facility operators while maintaining a security presence to protect against unauthorized access. A sensible approach. Dr. Hoffman approved. We've never sought conflict with legitimate government interests, Colonel. Our objection was to suppression of technology that could benefit humanity, not to reasonable oversight of its implementation. Emma had moved to one of the monitoring stations, displaying the expanding network of connections across the country. These are all people connecting right now? Millions of them? James Wilson Jr. nodded. Ordinary citizens suddenly finding themselves with extraordinary communication capabilities. Most don't yet realize what's happening. They simply notice their devices working better than ever before. But soon, they'll discover capabilities that weren't possible with conventional networks. Such as, Emma prompted. True peer-to-peer. Connection without central servers or service providers, he explained. Perfect privacy through quantum encryption that can't be broken or backdoored. Free exchange of information at speeds and volumes that make current internet capabilities seem primitive by comparison. And as they discover these capabilities, Frank added, they'll begin to question why they've been denied them for so long, why they've been paying escalating fees for deliberately restricted and monitored communication services when this alternative was technically possible decades ago. Dr. Hoffman's expression grew solemn. That questioning is the true revolution, Emma. Not just the technology itself, but the shift in perspective it enables. People realizing that artificial scarcity and controlled access to communication isn't a technical necessity, but a business and control model. The chamber briefly dimmed again as the array underwent another phase transition, its blue-white glow intensifying and taking on subtle rainbow harmonics at its edges. The humming resonance deepened, becoming almost musical in its tonal quality. Final integration phase initiating, announced one of the specialists. The network is achieving quantum coherence across all active nodes and establishing permanent harmonic resonance. On the main display, the blue field representing blackfish coverage now encompassed the entire continental United States and significant portions of Canada and Mexico. Tendrils of connection were visibly extending across both Atlantic and Pacific oceans, reaching toward other continents. It's spreading globally, Emma observed with awe. Yes, Dr. Hoffman confirmed, though full global coverage will take time as the quantum field establishes transoceanic bridges. We have partner nodes, prepared in strategic locations worldwide to facilitate the expansion. This has truly been decades in the planning, Colonel Reeves remarked, professional admiration evident despite her official caution. Longer than that, Dr. Hoffman replied with a hint of wistfulness. The vision began in 1962 when a group of idealistic scientists and engineers imagined communication freed from political and economic control. Most of them didn't live to see this day, but they prepared for it with remarkable foresight. Emma felt a renewed connection to her grandfather, imagining him working secretly for decades to preserve and enhance technology he believed could transform human connection. The quiet, practical farmer she had known had simultaneously been a visionary engineer laying groundwork for a communications revolution. "I wish I could have known this side of him," she said softly. Frank smiled with understanding. "In many ways, you did. His values and vision shaped how he raised your father and influenced you. His belief in practical stewardship, in balancing innovation with respect for natural systems, those values weren't separate from his work on Blackfish. They were integral to it." A new alert appeared on the monitoring systems, drawing everyone's attention. "Incoming priority communication from Wheatfield Node," reported a specialist. "Video format addressed specifically to the Hartwell facility." "Accept and display," Dr. Hoffman directed. The main screen shifted to show a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and features that reminded Emma strikingly of her own father. She appeared to be in a facility similar to the one they occupied, with the glow of a Blackfish array visible behind her. "Aunt Catherine!" Emma gasped in surprise, recognizing her father's sister, whom she hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Catherine Hartwell had moved to Kansas after some kind of family disagreement before Emma was 10 years old, maintaining only distant contact through occasional birthday cards and holiday greetings. "Hello, Emma," Catherine Hartwell replied, her image remarkably clear and immediate despite the presumed distance. "I'm sorry we're reconnecting under such unusual circumstances. There's a great deal I've wanted to tell you over the years, but security protocols prevented direct communication until the restoration protocol activated." "You're part of this too?" Emma asked, struggling to incorporate this new revelation into her already overloaded understanding of the situation. Catherine nodded. "Jackson and I were both recruitment by Dr. Hoffman in the late 1970s. The second generation of Blackfish Guardians. When your father chose a different path, I took responsibility for the Wheatfield node, while Jackson maintained the original Hartwell facility. The family disagreement was largely fabricated," Catherine confirmed with a sad smile. "A necessary cover story to explain my relocation without revealing the true purpose. Your grandmother never forgave me for leaving, though she didn't know the real reason." Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions: surprise at discovering this hidden connection, sadness for the family rift that now appeared unnecessary, and a growing sense of her place within a larger legacy than she had ever imagined. All Blackfish nodes are now reporting successful activation and integration, James Wilson Jr. announced, checking the status displays. The quantum network has achieved full operational status across North America. Preliminary connections established with European and Asian nodes. Dr. Hoffman turned to Emma with quiet satisfaction. And so, after 60 years of preparation, secrecy, and patience, Blackfish finally fulfills its purpose. A new era of human communication begins today, starting with a young woman's accidental discovery beneath her family farm. Emma looked around the chamber at the gently humming array that connected her small farm to a revolutionary global network. At the people who had dedicated decades to preserving and enhancing her grandfather's vision. At the monitoring screens, showing millions of connections, multiplying by the minute as people discovered unprecedented communication freedom. "So, what happens now?" she asked, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and inspired by the responsibility she had inadvertently inherited. Dr. Hoffman's answer was simple but profound. Now, my dear, we begin the real work of helping humanity learn to use true connection wisely. Outside, as evening approached, the Hartwell farm had become the center of growing attention. Military vehicles secured the perimeter while news teams gathered at the roadblocks, sensing a significant story but unaware of its true magnitude. Local residents shared speculation about government testing or environmental concerns, their theories falling far short of the reality beneath their feet. And in homes and businesses throughout the region, people noticed their devices working with unprecedented speed and reliability, unaware that they were experiencing the first moments of a communications revolution that would transform how humanity connected. A revolution that began with an old tractor breaking through a weathered barn floor on a struggling family farm. The central array continued its harmonious operation, the quantum field expanding minute by minute across continental boundaries and ocean barriers. The blue-white glow pulsed with steady reassurance as the system Jackson Hartwell had helped create decades earlier finally fulfilled its purpose. Connection without control, communication without constraint, information flowing freely between people, regardless of distance or division. 3 months later, Emma stood in her newly replanted North Field, the summer wheat already showing promising growth thanks to the precision agriculture insights provided by the Blackfish Network. The farm had transformed from a struggling operation on the brink of foreclosure to a demonstration site for next-generation sustainable farming practices. Visitors from agricultural universities and independent farms across the country arrived weekly to witness the revolutionary integration of quantum technology with traditional agriculture. The military presence had gradually downsized to a small research contingent housed in a modest facility constructed near the barn, where government scientists worked alongside the Blackfish preservation team in a carefully negotiated collaboration. Colonel Reeves had been reassigned as official liaison between defense authorities and the rapidly expanding civilian applications of quantum networking technology. Emma's role had evolved beyond anything she could have imagined that fateful day when her grandfather's tractor crashed through the barn floor. As both a farmer and the official steward of the original Blackfish node, she found herself bridging worlds that had previously seemed entirely separate. Practical agriculture and cutting-edge technology, rural community needs and global communication, innovation. Your grandfather always said that true progress connects rather than divides, Aunt Catherine had told her during a recent visit. He believed technology should serve humanity by strengthening our relationship with each other and with the earth itself. That philosophy now guided Emma's approach to her unexpected responsibility. The Hartwell farm had become not just the birthplace of a technological revolution, but a living laboratory for its most beneficial applications: sustainable resource management, community resilience, and genuine connection unconstrained by artificial barriers or controls. Sometimes in the evening, Emma would sit on the porch where her grandfather had spent countless hours watching over his fields, and she would feel a profound sense of continuation. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save her family's legacy had unveiled something far greater, a hidden inheritance not just of land or technology, but of vision and purpose that would transform countless lives for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.